Alright, hello everybody. I apologise if the format of this video is a bit weird. It's gonna be a bit informal, a bit of a long video. Before anyone skips anything, I wanna make a disclaimer here. That's very important. Please don't skip through the video. If you want to watch it, but you don't have time, make the time to, because it's very, very important people understand a lot of what's said in this video. The stuff I'm going to talk about here is quite, it can be quite drastic with regards to PC performance. I don't want people taking my advice and then doing the wrong things with it or messing their PC up, etc. Please take my advice seriously. And I mean that. I really do. And I'm sorry for this long video. A video this long takes way too long to edit and plan, so it's going to be quite informal, and my editor and I will do our best to make sure it's not too long and boring. Edit the boring stuff out. And I'm not going to be responding to any troubleshooting questions. I'm not going to be responding to comments from people, nothing like that. If there's anything else I need to say in the video, well, if there's anything I didn't manage to say, I will put it in the description or something, or in the comments. You get the point. So, first of all, a lot of people have been waiting for this video from me, and it's generally going to be troubleshooting a Rocket League issue. Well, it's not really a Rocket League issue. It could be, but troubleshooting a massive issue. And this issue is described by what I'd say are three main factors. The first one is network and internet issues. The second is input lag. And the third is input lag inconsistency. These are the three things that you might be experiencing when you're using your PC. And in my case specifically, that'll be Rocket League. I'm a Rocket League streamer. If you don't know, you know now. I've been playing Rocket League for 7 years, a very long time, and I'm going to be talking about here, and we talk about the issues I've had, and I'm going to be troubleshooting them, or showing you how to troubleshoot them, and my fix and my solution for this. Before I go on, I want to make a reference to the idea of there being a heavy car bug. I don't believe that there is a heavy car bug. I'm not saying that I'm of the belief it doesn't exist, but I've not had evidence to suggest that something like that exists, and I mean that purely in the sense that there is some sort of bug with Rocket League that means it doesn't exist. That means there's some sort of bug in Rocket League, like it's an issue with the program itself. I'm not of that belief. I haven't seen evidence to suggest that. Saying that though, I do sympathise with people who have had issues with performance. In a competitive game, it's very important that the game and your system is performing well. And I know it can be very hard to be in a competitive environment when you feel that you're at a disadvantage because of something, and something particularly you feel is out of your control as well. Speaking from experience, I can say that it's very easy to recognise there's a problem and then fall down a rabbit hole troubleshooting it. I've been there and done that, and I'm sure in the community of people who speak about heavy car bug and all that, there are going to be those who say some things that don't have evidence or seem absurd and stuff. But I'm sure there are also a lot of people out there who are just having problems, maybe similar to what I'm having, and they don't really know what's wrong, and they can be misattributing it or troubleshooting it, whatever. And so I sympathise with those people, and I hope everyone's able to get, the performance they want. It's really important. In this video though, I'm gonna look at my whole process of troubleshooting, talking about it, and we'll eventually get to the fix. And it's really important you listen to all that, I promise. I will make a separate video that's a bit more, speaking more about the sort of my experience of it. I'm mainly gonna go through it in a informative and descriptive style. So first of all, I want to say, we're going to go on to the sort of what I've been through now. As I said, I've been playing Rocket League for 7 years now, and I've been a streamer of Rocket League for 3-4 years. And I've been dealing with these issues day in, day out. Years. I can't remember when I started experiencing these issues. I can't. I do feel there was a time where I wasn't, but I can't remember when that is. And this is very different to being in an environment where, you play a game for fun. This is my job. It's very important that I'm enjoying the game and it's performing well. And having dealt with this issue for years and years now, it's been incredibly hard. When it is your job as a streamer to entertain and to enjoy, having problems that seriously make you consider quitting the game and whatever is awful. And I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I'm going to go through some of the solutions I've tried, some of the things I've gone through. Maybe list them on screen, don't know if we'll get to that point, but I have tried high-end routers and modems. I've tried high-end CPUs, both from Intel and AMD. I've tried fast memory and I've tried slow memory. I've tweaked the BIOS of my computer many times. I've gone through multiple internet providers. I've tried high-quality cabling. I've used DSL, FTTC and FTTP. That's the technology or the way in which your internet connects to your property. And just to disclaim, FTTP is fiber to the property. That means that an internet line is going straight to your home directly. It doesn't really get more direct than that. I've tried QoS, quality of service. I've spoken to my ISPs. I've checked server routing to make sure that wasn't the issue. I've tried VPNs, virtual private networks. I've moved house multiple times. This issue has followed me across multiple properties now. I bought a high-end GPU, an RTX 3090, thinking it could be an issue with that. I've tried different motherboards. I've tried PCIe devices. I've tried different methods of storage. I've tried troubleshooting and hack guides. I've tried wireless and wired connections. I've moved to another country. I lived in England for a while. Had the same issue. I now live in Wales as of the time of this video, but the issue persisted in England. And not to mention, I've had good internet throughout this time, especially when I was in England, because I was in university and the internet there was fantastic. About as good as it can get, really. I've invested in a streaming PC in the past and tried to work with that. Just to mention, this issue is apparent and present both on and off stream. I've invested in low input lag hardware. I currently have the fastest monitor on the market, pretty much the PG259QN. I've tried changing polling rates of devices. I tried overclocking my controller, all that stuff. I've reinstalled Windows multiple times. I've tried different versions of Windows, different updates. Windows 8, Windows 10, Windows 11. I never wanted to use another operating system because that seemed ridiculous. I'd updated and changed my drivers on my PC. I consider myself to be very tech savvy. Well, not, I shouldn't say very tech savvy, but relatively tech savvy. I'm not unfamiliar with computers. And I've tried obscure fix after obscure fix, and people who are far more knowledgeable than I have posted ideas on forums, and I've tried all sorts of things and nothing has worked. Pretty much. I'm trying to paint the picture here that this isn't some normal problem that you can just Google and get the answer to. It just doesn't work like that. This is an incredibly weird and complex problem. And I want to also communicate just how hard it's been to deal with this. As of right now, I don't make that much money as a streamer. I never really have, and I've used so much of my disposable income, the income that I'm left with, after I pay for my bills and my utilities and all that. I've used so much of that trying to troubleshoot this problem, just to enjoy my job. I don't want this to come off as a sob story or something, but if there's anyone else who has been experiencing this issue, I really sympathise. It's been awful. Just horrible. And I just want to make clear that I've tried so many different things. There are countless things, lots of things I've mentioned of that list, but just want to make that clear. Obviously, when dealing with an issue like this, you have to kind of think, what could the issue be? My order of suspicions, as I'll put it, was first I thought there must be the Rocket League servers, because I do remember there was a time where I didn't have this issue, and I thought something must have changed. I didn't think it would be to do with me. And then you realise other people aren't having the same problem, and so you think, okay, it's something to do with me and my circumstances. And so you think, is it my internet? And you spend a long time troubleshooting your internet, and internet troubleshooting is a really awful thing, and it's very, very difficult to do because it's so complex. There are so many difficult things to deal with when it comes to troubleshooting internet problems, because so much of it is out of your control. And I tried everything within my control to improve my internet connection. And nothing worked. Nothing. I currently have an FTTP connection. It is fantastic internet. Not that high bandwidth, but it's very low jitter. It's low latency. Everything you could want for good gaming internet. It's directly connected to my house, my internet connection. And my ISPs have reported no issues, and I've worked with them a lot on this. And then once you get tired of thinking, it's my internet, you start to think it might be my PC. And you throw money at your PC, you throw everything at it, you think, and nothing works. It's the same problem. Then you start to think, is it a mix of all three? What could it be? Like, what else could it be? What else is between me and the game? And a lot of the time you start to think, is it me? Am I just bad at the game? Am I just experiencing something? Like, is it placebo? And that's kind of the worst part, because deep down there is something not right. Things are not as they should be. And you start to blame yourself. Now, for anyone who's not skipped through, I really appreciate that you've listened this long. I really do. And I'm about to go into the symptoms. I'm going to start showing you this issue. Because I don't want you to just take my word for it. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Rocket League. What I'm going to show you here is something I call wobble, which is... Okay, so I found the replay here. I've called it... Wait, where'd it go? There you go, wobble wobble, I've called it. It's a funny word, and I'll begin to show you this issue. So what you're about to see is what I believe to be server-client desync. To give you a very basic idea of kind of how online games work, you have a server and a client. The server is what you connect to, and that sort of has the most up-to-date version of the game. The server then sends information to your PC, which we'll call your client, and your client updates with that information. And the idea is that in a competitive game, you want your game to be as up-to-date as possible. You want it to be as close to the server's representation of the game as possible. You're never really going to be at exactly the same point as the server, but again, you want to minimize as much as possible. Server-client desync is when there is some sort of issue that means that the server is updating your client late, or at the wrong time, or not at the right interval. And so what you experience online, or what you experience on your client, doesn't match up with what is actually happening on the server. You've seen things like ghost touches. In a ghost touch, for instance, a player has hit the ball on the client side but not the server side because your client hasn't updated fast enough. And this makes it look like a player has hit the ball on the client side, but then when the server corrects for it, it looks like they've gone through the ball or something. That's an example of client-server desync. Now, Wobble, as I'm going to talk about here, is an example of client-server desync, and this is something which is constant, and I'll show you more of this later. Just to get to the point I want to get to here. So in this situation, my teammate has hit the ball. It's quite a heavy touch here, and replays, I believe, are a client-side recording. So what we're seeing is what my PC understands is happening. Just for reference here as well, we're on low ping, stable connection. After a heavy touch from my teammate, and he gives the ball away here, I need to stay forward to make sure this doesn't go in immediately. Like a fake challenge. As a fake challenge. Now, the opponent makes a heavy touch here, and I want to make a light touch on the ball to then get possession to beat out the other defender. And look what happens. To some of you, that might look quite normal, but what we need to pay attention to here is how delayed this reaction is on the car. This shows up in replays, it shows up in-game. Essentially what I believe is happening here is that when I'm touching the ball on this way, client side, I should be recovering through this. But then when I hit the ball, my car is actually in a different position to what my client is showing me. Or the ball's in a different position. And so when the server corrects for this, you see that the correction looks awkward and weird. It looks delayed. And now, I understand it's hard to see and it's hard to recognize. But when dealing with this issue, every touch is like this. Not every touch is so severe that it appears in the replay. But every time you touch the ball, there is some sort of desync that messes up your recovery. The ball doesn't come off your car right. You have a difficult time recovering or making your second touch, or something feels off. It always feels off. It is never ever right. When you're playing in high-level lobbies and dealing with this issue, it is incredibly hard to play. Some people might say, you know, this is what it's like having high ping or whatever. This is very different. High ping is not necessarily affected when it comes to client-server desync in this way. The netcode in the game is designed to help you deal with latency. Even with high latency, the game can work properly as long as that internet connection is stable. Someone who's playing on 100, 200 ping is not necessarily going to have these issues at all. There are input buffers in the game that can help with this, that you can see here. We have STS and CSTS, I might talk about those later, but I often have people say to me, you know, I play on high ping. No, this is completely different. This is very much different. And it's hard to understand just how difficult it is to play with this, where every touch you do is not right. Because of this client-server desync, the entire game feels off. The game is physics-driven, so everything you do in the game is determined by the physics, and the server is determining those physics calculations and then updating your client with them. I believe, anyway. And because of this issue, everything feels off. Every turn, every jump, every kind of small mechanic you can do, anything. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel consistent. It doesn't feel smooth. It doesn't feel coherent with what you're seeing on screen. Everything is off. I can't stress enough how difficult this is to play. And I keep saying that, but if you're playing at like SSL level, you know, I'm an SSL player myself. You cannot play at this level with this. I promise you, it is so difficult to play with it. And I'm not just going to show you this, I'm going to show you way more than this. It's really important I make the case here. In general, with these issues, you start to get ghost touches, you get lag resets, you get general issues that just seem like internet problems. This happens on and off stream, so you can understand why I might have thought it was an internet problem to begin with. Even just to go into freeplay here, when you're dealing with an issue like this, even doing like a simple mechanic like turning around on the spot here becomes incredibly hard to do. Because the timing in letting go of the power slide button when you're driving is very tight. There's a very specific time you need to let go of that in order to conserve your momentum. If the physics don't appear to be updating at the right time with a server-client desync, this becomes very difficult to do. Any kind of turn, anything, Irene to get that across is super difficult with this. I made a video about this a long time ago where I thought it was the servers having problems, and I'll show you parts of that video here and just talk about it so you can see the sort of behavior that happens very regularly to me, or happened very regularly before I fixed it. Alright, so I've got the video up here, which I can show you now, as I'm going to guide you through this. If you see in this portion here, when I flip into the ball, look how the ball accelerates very quickly off my car. The server is correcting the client side and is basically moving the ball where it should be, according to it. This doesn't just happen sometimes, this happens constantly. And I've been documenting these problems for a long time. And again, this is from years ago. This is from so long ago. You can see off the kickoff here, the ball is like sort of juddering a little bit before it decides on which direction it's going to go. It's very slight in this instance because you're seeing it at 60 frames per second of the Twitch recording. When you're playing at a high frame rate, like, 360 FPS and you've got a 360 Hz monitor, you can see this very clearly. You can see this kind of stutter being a problem. It's more pronounced in this section, as you can see when the kickoff happens, the ball rubber bands back and forth multiple times. And I don't blame people for looking at this behavior and thinking this is servers just being bad, but it's actually an internet problem. Or it seems to be anyway. You could have bad internet, but I knew in this instance it was not it's not my internet connection that's the problem. And obviously, this doesn't mean that it's impossible, but I'm trying to get across the idea that the entire game is desyncing, and there's stuff you can see, and there's stuff you can't see. A lot of it you can feel, stuff you can't see. This is a really good example here. Watch what happens on this airdrop bump. This sort of thing, for a long time, airdrop bumps have been undefendable for me because I very clearly hit the ball away and then I get bumped through. I could be on like 8 ping or 16 ping and this will happen every single time. It's very obvious in this scenario as well. I hit the ball and then you see the ball move away slightly after, and again, this is at 60 frames per second. In game, this is much more obvious. You can see here how the ball kind of moves down and then it bounces and then speeds up really fast. And you can see my car judder as it's pushed by the opposing car a bit. And again, at a high level, it's so hard to play with this. Every time you go for a 50, it doesn't come off the way you want to. There's a very good chance you'll get demoed. Every time you get bumped, it's so hard to recover from. Every time you touch the ball, it doesn't come off the way you want. Every time you turn, you come off at the wrong angle. When you jump into the air, everything is off. It ruins the entire game. And it feels like input lag, or it feels like some sort of input lag consistency. You see ghost touches and stuff happen there. I've got countless examples of this happening on my stream. And I know that everybody experiences this stuff from time to time, but this is a constant thing in all my games. This stuff just does not go away. It's been plaguing me for years now. Years and years. Something I came to notice is that when I looked at other streamers, they didn't have this problem. For a lot of streamers, their game would look pretty much flawless. The ball wouldn't rubber band, they wouldn't have these weird interactions, they wouldn't get lag resets pretty much every time they went for a flip reset. Which is when I started to recognize that, you know, this really did seem like a problem on my end, and it wasn't an issue with the servers. This is obviously K-Dop here, the streamer. He's always somebody that seems to have like a very good internet connection, but this is just one of many. This is like one of many that I've seen that just do not have these issues at all. I could name countless streamers that don't seem to have this problem. It's also worth noting that with the client desync, every touch you get and like shot you have just doesn't come off right, and so it's hard to do power shots, it's hard to get first touches, it's hard to do all this stuff. It's hard to win kickoffs. Everything is off. I know it's hard to understand, but until you've played on this, it is incredibly difficult to deal with. I'm gonna see if I can find a few more examples just to put out here. Maybe some clips from my channel. Here's another example of wobble I found. It's a pretty recent one actually, before these fixes were fully applied. Off the kickoff, I'm trying to hit the ball into the corner here. So I want to hit the ball kind of up, slightly up into this area, and then get a rebound off the corner into the goal. And you'll see what happens to my car when I touch the ball. You can see that it almost looks like the ball has sort of pushed me off it. It's only a small amount here because my internet at this point was fairly good, or you know, the fix had been partially applied but not fully. But you can see it being demonstrated there.
It's good to show that I'm lagging. Can't use the flip after the goal explosion. Oh! Bruh. See? Oh my god, this game. Oh, and he slows me down. No momentum on his car. Somebody make it make sense.
I just want to make it clear to everybody that I know that in Rocket League, if you don't hit the ball the correct way, you're going to come off it weird. That's something I'm very aware of. You know, I played the game for a long time. I'm not talking about situations where you go up for an aerial and you hit it badly, you know, like this or something, and you you can't get that recovery off them. I'm not talking about not coming into the ball with any momentum or something. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about getting a proper first touch on the ball, and then your car does this. Like, it's incredibly hard to recover off that every time you want to touch the ball in the air or on the ground. Whereas normally you just want to hit it in a very precise manner, and you kind of want the ball to go where you exactly, where you want it to. What ends up happening with wobble in every game is that whenever you touch that ball, your car just comes off like in a very awkward angle. It's like you lose control of the car. It's like the ball is pushing you off it, as I said. And so yeah, I understand the difference of getting the bad first touch and that affecting your car, but that's not what I'm talking about. The difference is night and day when you have this issue versus when you don't. And again, it's not only in the air, it's with every single touch you do, everything, and you get wobble, like, constantly. While I sit in free play here, I'm gonna talk about some of the other issues and list them. It feels like you're playing on high ping, so when someone touches the ball, it kind of teleports slightly. This makes it very hard to react to fast shots or fast plays, anything like that. Input buffers do not seem to help at all. Unfortunately, they do pretty much nothing. If anyone's curious as to what an input buffer is, the way you can think about it is that your game is delayed slightly, so it gives you input delay to make sure that you're in sync with the server. So basically to make sure that you don't get ahead of the server. Because of your latency, or could be wrong about that, but it's a general idea. These do not help. Had some success with CSTS, but only very partially. It just makes the issues not so bad, you just get rid of them. But CSTS incurs a massive input lag penalty because of how much it buffers the clients, unfortunately. When you have this issue, coming off the ground for aerials feels very challenging, so if you're in a game of threes and you need to very quickly get up to the ball, you might want to get up in a very forward way and get up quickly, but with this issue, you kind of end up coming off you come off the ground wrong, a bit like this or something, and it's not what you want. And again, you can't see this stuff when someone's playing with it, but the player can feel it, and there are some things that people can see. And my viewers have seen it. People have documented it. I wish I had the clips available. But again, this has been a problem for years. You'll often feel like your inputs are being missed. You will backflip sometimes when you swear you didn't actually backflip. And what that is that you've done the fast aerial at the correct time, but then because of the client server desync, the server thinks that you set an input late, and that causes you to backflip when you actually shouldn't have. Mechanics requiring precise inputs, either due to missed inputs or mistimed inputs due to the server desync, become very hard. Notably half flipping. A half flip is supposed to be obviously a very easy mechanic that you do, but often in games you try to do a half flip and something like this happens, and you get scored on from it. It's awful. I'm a consistent triple SSL player, and having had these difficulties, it has been a struggle to get to this point, or to get to that point with these issues. Normally takes me all season. I used to be a top 100 player, comfortably in ones. That's something that I was never able to do because I couldn't win any kickoffs, I couldn't do anything. Here are some weird things I've experienced, and I'd love for a developer to comment on this, if possible. First of all, when you play Rocket League offline, and I'm not talking about being in free play or something, I mean actually offline, you disconnect your PC entirely from the internet. The game loads a separate version of Rocket League. You can try this yourself, you just need to disconnect your PC. It loads a version of Rocket League that looks different, it has different features, etc. And the game feels fine there. I would still experience input lag and input lag inconsistency, and we'll get into that, but the issues that I would experience online would go away. And now you might be wondering about free play. What about free play? And I understand this is going to sound really crazy, but I can tell and have been able to tell when my internet is good or bad in free play for a long time now. And something that's been consistent the entire time is if I go to a workshop map, none of the issues I have in free play are present then. Workshop map always feels like offline Rocket League, always. If I go to a map like this, when I had these issues, Workshop would feel very different. I'm not a developer of this game, so I don't know. One theory I have is that free play is not actually offline, and it's actually that it's a LAN, it's a server hosted by the player. And the inputs are running through some sort of netcode, but it's just, you're essentially on a zero ping server. I don't know. I really don't know. You might be curious about that and kind of wondering how free play feels different or whatever, and you're free to not believe me. I've always felt very strange about this. Can also feel the differences with input buffers in free play too. But a lot of it is to do with the ball and the way the ball feels in relation to how it's sort of making contact with the car. When internet is good, the ball feels kind of very weightless, but also like you're making very solid contact with it, whereas when you have like issues, it feels very soft and floaty and doesn't feel like you're actually making proper contact with it. The physics in free play also feels slightly different, so like turns, if you do something like this, where you're turning very rapidly, when internet is bad, you can feel that becomes like unresponsive. And not in like an input lag way, I'd say. It feels sort of like the client is trying to catch up to something. It's hard to describe, but I've done this many times on stream where I've been troubleshooting and I say, oh, you know, this internet feels better, this internet feels worse. I go into a game and it's the same thing every time. Another issue I've noticed is that when I had these issues, my game would microstutter a lot. When I used to use a 240Hz monitor, I had to upgrade to a 360Hz monitor because the amount of stuttering I get when playing Rocket League was actually giving me a headache. Using 360Hz, it still looked stuttery, but less so because of the increased frame rate, to the point where it wouldn't give me headaches anymore. I've been playing Rocket League for a long time, and gaming for a long time. I've been gaming since I've, been able to hold a controller, essentially, as a small child, and I'm also on the autism spectrum, and I'm very sensitive to things like hypersensory sensitivity, that's a hard thing to say, is a common symptom of autism, and it's something I have. I'm very sensitive to light, to sounds, to stutters. And I've also always been very sensitive to input lag and input lag inconsistencies. I don't know whether that's related, but it's always been something I've noticed immediately, and it's always seemed like the amount of stuttering or micro-stuttering my game has been related to how good my internet is behaving. Doesn't necessarily mean it's caused by the internet, but it definitely feels connected somehow, which is interesting. With these fixes applied even when streaming now, well, recording, the game looks pretty smooth, which it never used to. I also want to point out that I tried overclocking my DualShock 4 because I was desperate for the game to feel better. And I trust in Rocket Science and the data they put out, and he basically reported that the input lag was on average lower, and the input lag variance, so how much it would change, was also lower on average. But whenever I tried this, the game would feel a lot worse. My inputs would feel even more inconsistent than they did before. Felt like the input lag was very inconsistent, and when I tried doing my own tests, it showed that the inputs and the polling rate were very much more inconsistent than they were with default polling rate. This was something that pointed me in the direction that it could be my PC that is actually the problem. This was a hard thing to kind of think about though, because I've had multiple PCs. Now, I've completely swapped out every component to my PC a few times in an attempt to troubleshoot this issue, and my past 3 computers have all had this issue. All of them. Which is very weird. And further made me think that it must be something to do with my internet or the servers, because it seems insane that 3 PCs would all have the same problem. Obviously this comes with all sorts of issues where you start to think that maybe you're crazy and that everyone else is actually experiencing this, and you're just going through some kind of bad period, but this didn't seem to be the case based on other people's experiences and looking at other people's gameplay and their interactions in games and stuff. And I wish I had hard evidence for this sort of thing. I really do. But before I move over to the next section, I just want to talk about, like, if you don't believe me with any of this, that's completely fine. But it's been documented for years now on my stream. I've talked about it a lot. I've displayed it on stream. I've shown it on stream. I've had people come in who have said, oh, you know, this just seems like placebo, it seems like there's not an issue, and then they see the game, like the problems the game having, and they think, okay, there's definitely something wrong. And I really appreciate all the people who have sat there and listened to me vent about this. It's not really something people should put up with. But this issue has been so draining. It affects my ability to play so much, and until you've experienced it, it's so hard to understand just how badly it affects everything. I currently don't know if some people completely don't have this issue, or if it's more of a spectrum and some people, well, everyone has this issue to a degree, but some less than others. I've met other people with this issue. There's a streamer who I'll show some clips from later, who's had a similar issue, and we've spoken about how we've all had the same symptoms and stuff in our game, and I provided my fixes to him, and his issues have gone away. I've shared these fixes with some friends, and they've all said their game performance has improved and everything has improved. And so I fully believe that there are other people definitely having the same problem. Before I get into the fix itself, I'm just gonna show you some testimony here. By testimony, I just mean showing you people whom this fix has worked for and whatever. He is a streamer, Boomer RL, after applying the fixes, saying the game now feels very responsive.
Fantastic.
Says it feels fantastic, and he's someone who's been dealing with this issue for years, same as I have.
And I just really wanted to.
This is Boomer saying about
understand how everything works myself.
He wants to understand how everything works, and he hates chalking it down to some issue with the game.
Spreading awareness
and he wants to spread awareness about it.
Heavy car bug or something. And I cannot imagine.
And he doesn't want to put it down to being some heavy car bug or something. Something I empathize a lot with here, and understand Boomer saying now that these issues are fixed, he feels he can finally progress in ranked.
We can finally make some progress in ranked. The Ravena fix works.
That he is saying that my fix works, because again, I've seen on his stream he has the same issues I do, and they're all gone now. Boomer here saying it's insane.
This is actually insane.
It's worth noting that all the things about free play feeling different and workshop being different, Boomer has corroborated all of this. He agrees. I don't want anyone to contact him or whatever. It's just a streamer who's been in a similar situation.
Oh my god, dude. I don't get bodied by resets anymore. It's beautiful.
When Boomer's talking about getting bodied by resets, he's talking about what I spoke about earlier, the wobble issue, where when you try to touch the ball, you come off it in a weird way. Often when going for resets with wobble, the ball kind of pushes you off it, or you recover off it in a very weird way, which causes major issues. It's like very hard to recover from actually getting the flip reset in the first place, which is no longer an issue for him, and it's no longer an issue for me. Here is some further testimony from Boomer. He says, absolutely amazing, the changes worked really well, I was clipping all day. Twitter say, nice, I'm glad to hear it. He says, thanks a lot, it restored my motivation to play today, and it felt impossible to tilt. Boomer's spoken a lot about how this has affected his mental health because he struggled to enjoy the game due to these issues, and I sympathise completely. Incidentally, here's Boomer confirming that his PC performance in general feels better after doing this. This is something I felt too. Other games felt more responsive and better, so it doesn't seem to be just a Rocket League issue. The game here in question is Hyperdemon, which is an FPS game. This is Luciana, another streamer I'm close with, and she says the game is so good. Her issues have been fixed. She's had similar issues I have. We've been working together to try and fix this for a while now. And it's worth noting that these fixes are consistent. They're not something you just put on and then over time it goes away. They are consistent. They stay. They do not change. Here's a screenshot of my phone with a conversation with my mod, Cal, who's had similar issues for a while now. I said, it's insane referring to the changes. He said, honestly, I can't believe it would be such a drastic change. Interactions feel very good. It feels like we're actually making touches to the ball. I said, as you said, it's night and day. The inputs, it feels like inputs flow from one to the next, to which he says, absolutely. Haven't felt any weird non-responsiveness or weird flips. Actually doing what I mean to do. When Cal here is referring to weird flips, I think he's referring to missed inputs that happen. Missed inputs causing your flips to come off in the wrong direction or just not happen at all. You get double jumps or backflips happen at the wrong times, that sort of thing. Just another thing to talk about here, which is very interesting. So this is the pro player Cash. This is their Twitter. Cash has said here that they got a new PC and they were having lag spikes that made it hard to play. I'm not sure what the nature of their lag spikes were. He says here it's just been happening on his new PC and he's checked all the drivers are updated and whatever. And then he managed to fix it despite all the regular solutions. He said that it was he changed Ethernet plugs. Now, this is interesting because when you change Ethernet plugs in a PC, you're changing the network controller, you're changing what's called the NIC, the network interface card. And one of my previous PCs had 2 Ethernet ports. And one was a Realtek, one was an Intel. And these issues I talked about in game, they differed. Neither of them solved it, but they were different. I had different experiences on each of them, and I eventually settled on using one over the other, which is very weird. It's totally possible that Cash didn't have these kinds of issues at all, I don't know, but I just wanted to use that to reflect a weird situation I had that kind of pointed at what the issue could be. Okay then, finally, let's get to the solution, and talking about that. First thing I want to bring up with regards to solution is it seems like the issue is either an operating system problem or it's a hardware problem. Can't say for sure, I'm not a Microsoft engineer. Something I need to look over here or explain is the idea of interrupts. So this is a simple diagram of an interrupt. So to kind of explain in very basic terms what an interrupt is, you have the CPU, which is like the brain of the PC, and it's always busy doing things and working. When a device needs the attention of the CPU, it will send an interrupt, which often goes to an interrupt controller. The CPU receives that interrupt, then it can either decline the interrupt or accept the interrupt, depending on what it's doing. You can think of this as like being a student in university and you have a professor that you need to help with your work, but your professor is very busy. When you need your professor to help you, you send them an email, which would be the interrupt in this instance, and they put their other work aside to handle your query or your interrupt. Now, another definition I need to get across here is DPC, which is a deferred procedure call. As it says here, a DPC is a Microsoft Windows operating system mechanism that allows high priority tasks to defer required but lower priority tasks for later execution. So it's a mechanism that if there is something that needs to be done immediately, it can put other tasks aside to be done later that aren't as important. Now this is important when we're starting to look at the solution to this problem, or at least it was in my eyes, in my situation. And what I'm showing to you here is a report from a software called Latency Mon. I'll just show you here. You can get Latency Mon from this website. You go to free downloads and then you go down to download the free home edition. I'll show you the program here. And what Latency Mon does is it checks your system and how well it's basically performing in real time. And if you go to drivers here, you can see the amount of time spent by the CPU on certain drivers. These ISRs are interrupt routines, and these are DPCs, and you can basically see what drivers are doing what and how much time they're taking. If you look immediately, if we look at the total execution times, the amount of time spent on each driver, you'll see that these two are very heavily outweighing the others. Well, not so much in this instance, but what's important to understand is that these two drivers, the NVIDIA driver and the DirectX driver, they're both graphics drivers. If you have an NVIDIA graphics card, then this will be an NVIDIA driver. If you have an AMD graphics card, it'll be a different driver. Just to show you a report here that I did before, over a longer period, look at the total execution time of these drivers. The DirectX driver and the NVIDIA driver are by far the most active drivers. They're using up the most time on a CPU. And 3000 milliseconds on a CPU is so much time. CPUs are incredibly fast. The driver highlighted here is the NDIS driver, which is the Network Driver Interface specification driver. And as far as I understand, this is basically your network driver. It handles the the internet on your PC. These two drivers, the WDF driver and the NTOS kernel driver, these are essentially the core Windows drivers. These drive Windows, they make Windows work. They're very important drivers. And as you can see, the biggest kernel driver for Windows is being kind of, I wouldn't say outperformed, but more time is being spent on these graphics drivers than it is on the actual Windows kernel, which shows you just how much time these graphics drivers are taking up. If you compare those kind of crazy amounts to my actual network driver, you'll see that my network driver is not taking up much time at all in this instance. Give me a second while I find a previous report that I did prior to these fixes. Alright, sorry that took me a while. You would have not dealt with that because the editing though. This is a previous report I did where you can see that my network driver has a very high execution time relative to other drivers. If we look at the NT kernel and system driver here, which is a Windows kernel, or the DirectX graphics kernel, you'll see that the execution time on the NT kernel is 110 milliseconds. And then the NDIS driver is roughly 3 times that. If you go back to a more recent report done on my PC, you'll see that now the Windows driver, or the Windows kernel driver, is over 3 times as high in execution. I just wanted to point this out because sometimes you can have drivers that are behaving weirdly. This wasn't the exact cause of the problem, but when you have a driver that has 315,000 DPCs compared to a driver not really doing as much comparatively or relatively, it can point out there's a problem. And the problem largely rests with other drivers taking up too much time. So if we look at this recent report again, you'll see the amount of DPCs are so high for these graphics drivers. And when you're playing Rocket League, especially at high frame rate, your graphics cards and the graphics drivers are doing a lot on Windows. They're making sure that every frame comes through at the right time and on time, this, that, and the other. They're doing a lot. And so these drivers can very easily clog up your system. If you're not doing anything, it's not going to be too much of a problem. But if you're streaming, especially in addition to playing the game, it can cause these problems. Another behavior I recognized is this. If we look at each CPU, so each core, this is virtual cores too, you'll see on my PC that the loads are relatively spread out. You have 9, 9, 5, 5, 5, 5, 4. And these are all looking at how much time was spent in interrupts on each CPU. This is on Windows 11. I don't know if this is the case for everyone, but when I was on Windows 10, I found the Windows 10 had a very bad behavior where it puts all the interrupts, as you can see here, on core 0. This is the interrupt cycle time, and it puts them all on 1 or 2 cores, which can't be great for performance. Again, I can't be certain, I'm not a Microsoft engineer, and it could just be my CPU. I have an Intel 12700K. And it could have just been that there was a new scheduler for the older Lake CPUs. I don't know, because they have a different core layouts. You can see here that there are other people having this issue with interrupts only being handled on core 0. You don't want all your interrupts to be handled on one core, it causes a problem, and if Rocket League is also running that core, that's obviously going to cause issues. I can't say this for certain, but I would recommend Windows 11. Okay, getting into a straight list of changes and fixes now to do. My first recommendation would be to reinstall Windows and to do a clean reinstall of Windows. Do not reinstall it from the ISO you already have. Download it again and reinstall it from there. Very important. Once you've done that, or if you've not done that, then I recommend trying to slim down the size of your graphics drivers as much as possible. You can use programs like DDU in order to do this. This is Display Driver Uninstaller. Find a guide on how to use it. You can download it from Guru 3D. If you're going to install an NVIDIA driver though, I recommend using NV Slimmer. NV Slimmer is a program that slims down NVIDIA drivers to make them, take less time. So as you can see, NV Slimmer shows you all the things included in the NVIDIA driver, and you can select on either ones you want. These are the recommended 3, which is what I take, and then you repackage that as a different driver. Then with DDU, you launch in a mode that has no network, and then uninstall your display driver. Make sure to check that you don't want Windows to automatically install a new graphics card update. And then when you get back onto your PC out of safe mode, you should really use DDU in safe mode. Watch a guide on it. Then you reinstall the repackaged NVIDIA driver. This is important. Getting rid of all this will make it faster, but make sure you know what you're doing, you select the things you want. If you use GeForce Experience, tick this. If you use that, whatever. You don't have to do this, obviously, but I did it. If you're not tech savvy, avoid doing this. Also, when you're on Windows 11, try to debloat it as much as you can. Do not use any debloat scripts. Do not use anything like, do not use anything like this. These will mess up Windows. Please don't. I really recommend against them. Instead, I recommend going through your applications and uninstalling things on Windows you don't need. You can uninstall Windows Game Bar because it's an overlay that's constantly running. Anything you can do to basically make Windows less demanding graphically, I recommend, and less demanding on your CPU. Again, this isn't necessary, it's just something I recommend, but... Okay, now getting into the big boy steps and the things that are really important here. Hello, sorry for the weird cut. This is just a future edit. You can see that this is on the 1st of December. Just wanted to further elucidate the fix and provide a bit of an update to it. You probably wouldn't have seen the original edit of this, so it wouldn't make much of a difference anyway. But what you're looking for is, first of all, remember to be on a high performance power plan. That's very obvious, very simple, but it's very important. Secondly, you're going to want to download the MSI utility program. This has nothing to do with MSI the company, so don't worry about that. It's not some bloatware. You want to Google MSI Util v3 and you'll find a forum on Guru 3D. Once you're here, scroll down until you can find the download link, which is here, and then download this file. This file is a registry editor tool, so be very careful with it. Run this as administrator. This is very important, otherwise the program will not start. You'll need to run anyway, and this program should come up. This shows all the programs or all the devices on your computer. Sometimes some devices will be missing from this, but the main ones you need are there. So you can see my GPU is here, my network controller is here. As I spoke about earlier, there are graphics drivers that are very busy on the system, which seem to be the cause of inconsistent input delay or input delay in general, and then causing bottlenecks or problems with other devices working properly on the system. First things first, take a screenshot of your current settings. So your settings will likely have a lot of undefined, maybe some things are set to high automatically. Take a screenshot of them. On Windows, you can do Shift, Windows key and S. to then create a screenshot. Once you got that screenshot, make sure to save it somewhere, either save as a file, put it onto Discord, somewhere we have it as a backup. This is important. If you haven't already, I recommend making a system restore point before this. If you don't know how to do that, go to system restore, enable restores, and then create a system restore point, just in case. Now my first recommendation is going to be that you put everything to low except for your graphics card, which you'll put on high, and your network card, which you'll put on normal. You might have two network cards, you might have one dedicated to Wi-Fi and another dedicated to Ethernet. I recommend leaving both of them on normal, you won't be using both at the same time. And if you don't know what the name of your network card is, then go to your network settings in Windows and find them there. You can see Intel Ethernet controller. By default, Windows will have a lot of these on undefined. When you're gaming and doing other GPU intensive tasks, the GPU's drivers are taking up a lot of time, as we saw with the latency monitor test. When this is done, click apply. Something that's important to make very clear here is that any devices that you really need, you shouldn't really put on low, or any devices that are going to be busy. For instance, if you get your audio through the high definition audio controller, you might experience very occasional audio dropouts where the audio buffer will not be fast enough. You might experience occasional audio dropouts. If you do and that bothers you, then you can change the interrupt priority of that. This setup here is purely to prioritize the GPU first and foremost to make sure that the game is putting out frames consistently and that Windows is not suffering inconsistent graphics output. And then the internet controller to make sure the interrupts of the network controller are sufficient for the game so you don't end up with lag. Because remember, in Rocket League, physics are very much tied to the netcode, and so the entire game can feel off if the internet connection is not stable. If you really want to prioritize your input devices, then I recommend you put them all onto the same USB host controller. A USB host controller is essentially the USB ports on the front or back of your computer, generally the back. As you can see on my computer, I have multiple host controllers here. I have two, some people have many. If you don't know what USB host controller your input devices are connected to, then you can find them in your motherboard's manual, generally. Even though my input devices are on low priority here, they still seem to be handled fine. For instance, if I put my Fresco Logic USB host controller to normal priority, I actually experience somewhat degraded input lag and then somewhat degraded network performance in-game. The degree to which you can prioritize different devices' drivers will very much depend on how powerful your CPU is. This can be because of core count, but this will often be because of clock speed. These settings have worked for a lot of people and they've been pretty consistent, and they have been for me. Actually, they've been completely consistent. But obviously, if things aren't working for you, feel free to change these around a little bit, but I really recommend prioritizing the GPU. When you've done that, you can go down to the network controller. Again, this will depend on whether you're using Wi-Fi or a cable connection or both. I'm using a Y connection, so I'm going to this network controller. In properties then, in configure, you can change your interrupt moderation rate. The interrupt moderation rate, or the interrupt moderation function, essentially makes the driver send out fewer interrupts. The higher the interrupt moderation rate, the fewer interrupts the network controller will send out. So for instance, if this is set to extreme, then the network controller will not send out many interrupts compared to if it was on minimal. This again will very much depend on your CPU and how powerful your system is. You might find that if you leave this on disabled so the network controller can send as many interrupts as it can, which should essentially make your network performance more responsive and better, you might find that you have a bit of input lag or degraded performance because of that. Some network adapters will have a setting to allow this to be adaptive, or you won't have an interrupt moderation rate at all. If there is an option to change the interrupt moderation rates, it's generally an adaptive algorithm that tries to provide as many interrupts as the system sees fit. Again, play around with this a bit and see what works for you. I recommend just leaving this as what it was on default and seeing if that fixes your problems. Keep in mind that changing these settings and clicking OK will then disconnect your internet for a few seconds. On the Blurbusters forums, there's an interesting conversation about interrupt moderation, which you can find here. And you can see some data presented by some users about their experiences with different levels of interrupt moderation, which may interest you. You can see here that for this user, with their experiments, they found that with interrupt moderation set to extreme, the round trip time on average was just under 1 millisecond. Whereas with interrupt moderation off, the round trip time was around 0.1 milliseconds. Again, having more interrupts being sent out by the network controller will decrease system performance, but it will provide a more consistent network performance. Again, decreasing the level of interrupt moderation or allowing the network adapter to send out more interrupts will improve network performance but degrade system performance, so be careful with this. If you want to make sure that the MSI settings have been applied, MSI, by the way, stands for Message Signaled Interrupts, which is an improved form of interrupt. Don't mess with any of these settings here. Leave them as they are unless you really know what you're doing. But if you want to make sure that they have been applied, then for instance, find the device, say the GPU here, and double click on the name of it, and this will bring up the registry. Go to Device Parameters and then Interrupt Management. From here you can see device priority. A value of 1 means that it is low priority, a value of 2 means it's normal, a value of 3 means it's high priority, and I think a value of 0 means it's undefined. And here you can see all the devices. One more thing here, if you have any devices that are using MSI X interrupts, then you can use a tool to make sure that these devices are using MSI X instead of regular MSI. MSI X interrupts are an improved form of interrupt, so in order to enable those, you'll want to download this tool. In order to find this tool, you can type into Google, and you can find the download link here, and download it from there. Once you've got this tool, then you can run it as administrator, and then find a device on here, and when you find it, go to Advanced, and you want to set the policy to spread messages across all processors. Remember to only do this for devices that are using MSI X interrupts or are capable of supporting it. If you can't find a device that you see on here, for instance the Fresco Logic USB Extensible Host Controller, then you can see the PDO name here, which we can see is ends with PCI 0019. If we take the tool and then slowly go down, we can look at the device object name seen here. And we're looking at PCI 0019. And as you can see, it's here, and the policy is set to use MSI X interrupts. Most devices will have this enabled by default, but some don't. One more thing I'd like to talk about is the input buffers you can find in game. You can go to Settings and Gameplay and select your input buffer here. This may be something repeated in the video, so sorry, it's just this recording has been done later on. The gist of it though is that the input buffers will delay your client by a number of frames to make sure that you don't end up desyncing with the server, or to help with server desync. Default uses a very low input buffer consistently, which means that you won't experience input lag, but you might experience server desync with your inputs, or rather your clients. This might feel fast and snappy, but you might experience wobble, inconsistent demos, you might have difficulty winning 50-50s, etc. If you use STS, then depending on how desynced you are from the server, you'll feel some input delay. This input delay can be felt in free play. Contact with the ball might feel immediately different, but interactions in the game should be more consistent with the server. As for which one I recommend, it really depends. If your internet is pretty bad, then I would recommend you use an input buffer. If it's really bad, I'd recommend using CSTS instead of STS. CSTS is a constant input buffer, whereas STS tries to approximate it depending on your connection to the server. If you play on high ping, then STS might be very beneficial, whereas if you typically play on very low ping servers, or just quite low in general, or say less than 50 ping or something, then default might work fine for you. I think input delay is very important in this game and is a large factor of a player's confidence and general ability to play well, and so I typically don't like to sacrifice input lag unless I absolutely have to. One more thing I'd like to mention is if you click apply in this program, the settings change immediately. You don't need to reboot, and so you can feel between these settings very quickly to see what works for you. One thing I find is that when I increase the GPU priority to high, then my desktop experience is vastly improved. The mouse movement feels snappier and much more responsive. Some days I load up my PC and my mouse would feel very sluggish, but now it's a very consistent experience. Again, I don't know why some people seem to experience this issue and some people don't. These changes are also persistent, you don't need to apply them every time, they just stay that way. They edit the registry. I will make another video speaking more about this kind of stuff and kind of effects it has on the game at a later date, but for now, these are the settings. One thing I will say is that I've not had these experiences myself, but it's very possible that in very GPU heavy scenarios, you might find that a high priority on the GPU drivers or the graphics drivers may cause degraded performance in other areas. For instance, if you are doing audio sensitive work while you are having a heavy load on the GPU, that could cause problems. Rocket League is not a very GPU intensive game because there isn't much to load on the GPU for it to render, and so it doesn't seem to affect it there very much, in a negative way. Just to end the video out here, I think it's kind of ridiculous that driver settings that on your PC by default, and it's different for everyone else depending on your hardware, can massively affect the performance of your PC and can cause these sorts of issues, and there's nobody on the internet that has this solution anywhere. And finally, before I end the video, if anyone wants to share this fix or make a video about it, I'd appreciate if you could credit the original video in this, and you could suggest this video because I don't want people messing up their PCs doing this. It's very easy to do something like this and not make a backup and whatever. And a lot of blood, sweat and tears has gone into fixing this. Yeah, I'm just exhausted. I've been recording now for 2 hours and I'm just so tired. I'm just gonna head off now, but I hope this was helpful and I'm glad it's fixed. Thank you guys so much, as always, and I will see you again soon. Goodbye.